Tonight we're in Croydon in South London. Welcome to Question Time. Well, watching or listening, a big welcome, good evening to you and to all our audience here, and of course to our panel. Tonight, the Conservative Culture Secretary, Sajid Javid, Labour's Shadow Business Secretary, Chuka Ramuna, the Liberal Democrat peer, Shirley Williams, Dia Chakravarti from the Taxpayers Alliance, and the novelist Will Self. And remember to join the fray via text or Twitter. Our hashtag BBCQT. Follow us at BBC Question Time. Text us 83981, push the red button to see what others are saying. Our first question tonight from Margaret Arnold, please. Margaret Arnold.
In his budget speech, George Osborne kept telling us we are better off. So why do a lot of hard-working families not feel that way?
Sajid Javid.
Well, what George Osborne referred to in his budget were measures of living standards that have been set out by the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility that show that compared to 2010, by the end of this year, the average household would be £900 better off. So it is an average household. Of course, that's not therefore the situation of everyone, but it is an important statistic. It is one that's used by the OECD. And just today, the independent IFS, which is a sort of think tank that looks at these things, said that's a very reasonable number to use. I think overall what the budget demonstrated is that the long-term plan that the government has is working. It showed that the deficit keeps falling, the growth of our economy is strong and getting stronger, and I think most importantly of all, that jobs are being created at a record rate. We have more people employed today than at any other time in history. We are the jobs factory of Europe. We had more jobs created in Britain, 2 million in the last 5 years, than all other countries in the European Union put together. That's about 1,000 jobs a day being created over the last Parliament. And that has to be the best way to raise living standards for anyone. Because, yes, there's lots of other things that governments can do and try to help with, like cutting taxes, which is what we've done, taking 3 million people out of taxation, income taxation altogether. But the most important thing at the end of the day is to make sure you've got a growing economy that's creating jobs. And it's happening because of our plan. If we abandon that plan, we will put all of us at risk.
That's an answer, but it's not the answer to the question, which is why aren't people feeling this if it's happening? I mean, you say all these things, and yet you only have, according to the polls, a third of the country agreeing with you. Labour only has a third of the country. We'll come to them in just a moment. The IFS, with these statistics, says, yeah, but it's nothing to boast about, even if £900 is true. Yeah, and it's only a statistic. Who knows whether it's true or not.
And part of the answer is that when we went through the Great Recession, it was the deepest recession in almost 100 years. So when you have such a big fall in the size of your economy, of course, people are going to be worse off. And that is not corrected overnight. It takes hard work and it takes hard decisions. That's what we've been doing, and the answer has to be to stick with a plan that's creating jobs at a record rate and lifting more people out of poverty than ever before.
Chuka Ramuna.
Well, the question was, why do people not feel better off? And it isn't just a question of whether you have more people in work. I think it's good that we've got more people in work, but it is the nature of the work that so many people are doing. And work is more insecure. You've got 1.8 million zero-hours contracts. You've got more people now. We've just seen a rise of people working part-time who want to work full-time. And we've got almost 5 million people in our country not earning a wage that they can live off. That's why people don't feel better off, though.
So what do you make of the statistic that Sajid Javid used, of people feeling are actually £900 better off on average? Well, is it not true?
It's not... At the time of the general election, even if you take George Osborne's measure, people will not be better off compared to 2010. You'll note that Sajid just said by the end of the year. The figure that we use is one from the Independent Office for National Statistics, which shows that people will be earning are earning, on average, £1,600 less now than they were in 2010. Actually, here in London, we're in Croydon, people on average in London are earning £3,200 less now than they were in 2010, which is the biggest fall of any region. And, of course, all of this was done in the name of reducing the deficit. And the Chancellor promised to balance the books by this time in the Parliament. And he's failed to do that. And the reason he's failed to do that is because wages have been stagnating, the Exchequer hasn't been getting in the income tax receipts and it hasn't been getting in the national insurance receipts. And this is the thing about reducing your debt and your deficit. It isn't just a question of how you make efficiencies and what cuts you might apply to public services. It is actually a question of how much are people earning, and are you prepared to also ask those who are earning a lot of money to make a little bit of a bigger contribution as we seek to come out of the difficult period we've been in?
Dear Chakravarti.
I think that the reason that a lot of the time this, the economic recovery that we keep hearing about is not felt is because there's a cost of living crisis in the form of high taxation. And it's exactly the figures that, exactly the office that Chuka just quoted, Office of National Statistics, which showed us last year that an average family in 2012 spent a higher proportion of their income on taxes than they spent on food, shelter, energy put together. Can you imagine that? It was over £1,000 more that they spent on taxes. And that's what we need to tackle. And that is squarely in the hands of our politicians. They can do that without tinkering with the market, without doing all sorts of complicated things that they keep doing. Just do that. Give us more tax cuts and we will feel the recovery. That's what I think.
So how do you get the tax cuts without borrowing to make up for it?
I'm so pleased you asked me that, David, because only last week...
It's a fairly obvious question.
Well, only last week, but thank you for the opportunity. Only last week we got out our spending plan, which is so far the only fully costed catalogue of savings that we think can be made in order to put us on the way to recovery. There are 41 policies in there. Now, you may or may not agree with all of those. My point is to get that debate going, because so far from all our political parties we're hearing savings have to be made. No one's disputing that. We're not getting any real plans, though. We're not getting any real details from any of our political parties.
Let me go to Shirley Williams. Shirley Williams, you produced a different budget today.
Yes, we did.
From the one you had yesterday.
No, that's not fair.
You stood up in the House of Commons and said we don't agree with that.
You have to grow up and be part of a coalition, David. You don't remember.
I'm not part of any coalition.
You've lived a long time and you don't know about coalitions. The coalition, quite straightforwardly, is about to enter an election. In that election, there will be a difference of opinion between the Liberal Democrats, the Conservatives, Labour, and we will all have an open battle about what should happen. We've loyally supported the coalition. In fact, only the other day, I think yesterday in Parliament, that very distinguished Tory MP, Andrew Tyree, who is the chairman of the Select Committee on the Treasury, said precisely that he didn't think the Liberal Democrats would be able to stick with the coalition until the end of the crisis that we've gone through, and we have, and there we are, and we've supported it. But we don't agree, and particularly we don't agree with what Dia has just said. In other words, you cannot have a situation where a large number of members of the public say that they want more spent on education, they want more spent on health, and now a number are saying they want more spent on defence, and cut taxes at the same time. It doesn't work. And with great respect to Dia, who's entitled her opinion, you cannot run a society where you want good public services and then cut taxes all the time because you won't have them. Let me say one other thing. I think many people don't realise what an effort has been gone into keeping the ship afloat. We don't seem to realise how near the edge of the crevasse we were when the election started, and when the Parliament started. And I'm not one of those who picks out Labour and blames Labour entirely. I think a great deal of the crisis was the banks. But having said that, it is amazing that we have got to where we've got to. I think it's extremely impressive, actually, something of a remarkable achievement that this country should have come through when Italy and Greece and Spain and other countries are sinking still. And I think instead of jibbing at it, we should accept that that's a very good thing.
But Margaret Arnold's question... Margaret Arnold's question, which is a political question with the election coming up, why, if George Osborne tells us we're better off, do hard-working families, she said, not feel it?
Let me be quite honest. We only, if we're better off, it's a feature of the last 12 months. I think that you would agree with me, too, that for a very long period of time, we were worse off because we were trying to deal with the deficit and the debt. And we're doing it in a situation where we had no extra money to bring in. So, of course, we were worse off for 3.5 out of the 5 years. And when that happens, we all know that from our own lives. You feel worse off. It takes time to feel better off. And we're only just better off by a fragment, literally in the last quarter, that's been true.
OK. I'm going to bring in Will Self, and then we'll go to some members of the audience who want to argue about this. Will?
I mean, I don't think the average figure tells you anything, really, does it? I mean, it's an averaging of all of these incomes. So, of course, a lot of people are going to be worse off and must be worse off. I think it's a... You know, if it is a recovery, it's a frothy coffee kind of recovery. I think Chuka's right about this. It is... What we see, really, is people who weren't very well off to begin with are really in pretty dire straits. People who were precarious are made to feel more precarious by the kind of economy that is being grown. And yes, as Shirley was saying, some people who were, you know, reasonably well off took a hit and haven't got back up there yet. So I'm not really convinced. I mean, a chancellor who goes into an election with a fiscally neutral budget is not actually that confident a player, because he can't afford to really do anything. And what lies behind this, and is waiting to bite us on the ass, as our American friends would say, is the massive cuts that are in line in the next Parliament. They're massive. You ain't seen nothing yet. And actually, public services are in terrible shape. Friends of mine who work in the National Health Service, particularly in mental health services, are basically just having breakdowns themselves because they can't cope with it. So, you know, jolly old George saying that he's going to whack public spending again if he gets back into office. You know, I'm no great fan of the Labour Party, but I don't think we should let him.
But Will, let me say this.
I said that here from... Yes. The woman there, we've got there. Yes.
I am fairly tired of hearing about how hard up people, the hard-working families, because political rhetoric is addressing hard-working families. What about the most vulnerable and the poor in society, which I don't think that any major political party actually talks about it. And I find it fairly disgusting, especially when you think about the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It's actually stated today that the poor are the ones that have borne the brunt of the tax and benefit changes. And this is something that we don't hear. We always hear about hard-working families.
Sajid Javid, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I do. The best way to help the poor is to make sure that we have a growing economy. There is no getting away from that. That is not just in terms of jobs and opportunities, but Will talked about public services. If we're going to fund the NHS properly, education, it all requires a growing economy. We move away from that, and then we will not be able to help those that are struggling most and the poorest in society. And that is something that we've got to build on. And if you look at the facts, I mean, we can sort of play class war, we can sort of come up with things that are unsubstantiated, but look at the facts. Relative poverty, as measured by the ONS, is down by 600,000 over the last 5 years. Children living in families that are classed as poor, it's down by 300,000 over the last 5 years. Inequality is at the lowest level for almost 20 years. These are the facts, and that's what we should focus on.
In answer to the point that you were making...
Can you answer...
Actually, well, I can. Basically, you see a situation where work and poverty have come together. Almost half the people living in poverty in our country are in work. That is why you have to get...
That's not true.
It is true. And that is why we need to get our minimum wage up to £8, which we're committed to doing, and incentivise employers to pay a living wage. Yeah. But just on Shirley's point, Shirley was talking as if somehow the government doesn't share any responsibility for the original question, which is the cost of living issues that I think you were talking about. This ignores the fact, Shirley, that you and your party voted to jack up VAT, which had a massive impact on people's cost of living. And if you actually look at the Institute for Fiscal Studies analysis of the tax and benefiting changes that have been made by your government, they have deprived families of at least £1,000. That's why people are so angry with the Liberal Democrats on these types of things.
There's been an increase of £1,500 as a result of the rising of the tax threshold.
But that's been completely wiped out by what you did to VAT, benefits and tax for low and middle-income earners. You can't hide away from that fact.
It goes all the way up the line. And if I may go in for being a bit with you and two, Labour has not committed itself to any decision about where it's going to go with public services. It hasn't told us. It refuses to give figures.
We have. Well, say, for example, the NHS. The NHS, we're going to raise monies, £2.5 billion into the NHS. So we've got 20,000 more nurses and 5,000 more doctors. That is actually...
huge amount less than is...
But the NHS is in crisis at the moment. You look at A&E. In the last 12 months, Shirley, we've had over 1 million people who waited more than 4 hours in A&E. You look at any of the hospitals around here, my constituency is next door. The A&E is in crisis at the moment. We saw no mention of funding for the NHS in the budget yesterday
Wales
at all.
Wales is a Labour-run country.
But that's rubbish.
And it's not rubbish.
Let's leave the NHS, and come back, Sajid, to the point you were making about people out of poverty, families out of poverty. Which
you would think the way Chuck is talking that Labour actually had a good track record on poverty reduction and job creation.
Yeah,
the last Labour government left unemployment higher by 500,000.
We did.
Relative poverty was up by 600,000. That's the track record of Labour. And you left us with the deepest recession in almost 100 years.
Like
what do you think that did for poverty?
You opposed.
What did that do for poverty?
We gave pensions tax credit to poor pensioners to make sure they weren't living in poverty.
Chuck, you've had your turn.
No, wait,
You've had your turn.
One at a time.
And Chaka also mentioned the national minimum wage. The national minimum wage is going up by 3%. That's a rise in real terms. Compare that to 0.6% inflation is what we're enjoying today. If it carries on at that pace, it will actually be higher than £8 in 2020. No. So Chaka actually wants to cut the minimum wage.
Let's hear from another member of the audience. The man at the very back there with spectacles. You, sir.
Yeah, it was just with regards to the tax. That's the lovely lady on the end mentioned about, you know, we're spending more on our tax than we do on our food and energy. I just think it's absurd, and I think it's a cheat for politicians to come out on national telly and tell us what we should do and what we should pay with our taxes. I just think at the end of the day, let's not talk about more, and these are not isolated incidents where, you know, the members of Parliament are misspending our tax money. I just think there's got to be a time where the taxes surely have got to reduce and we actually start spending our money on our lives.
Can I just come in on that, actually? On what was just said. I mean, just simple things. It seems like our politicians go some way towards achieving something, but not the full way, which means that we don't quite feel the effects that we should. So one thing that I did like in the budget, actually, Sajid, was the raising of the personal allowance. Great stuff, you know? OK, good. But why don't you also bring national insurance in line with income tax, which means that, you know, you would take more people out of income tax entirely there, right at the bottom. It's an easy thing to do, I think, and you could easily do that, and that would really hone it home. Just one thing on what Shirley said, because Shirley gave me the respect of really giving me a good answer to what I was saying. But I would like to come back with that, on that, Shirley, that our analysis that we did on all official figures shows that just means testing winter fuel payments, right? Just means testing would save £1.4 billion. How many nurses, how many cancer drugs, how much more money in people's pocket is that? So we could do that without raising taxes. I can see that here.
This is the pensioners' £200 fuel.
We could means test it. One of my slightly younger colleagues, who's also very punchy, says, I cannot believe that the Queen has a bus pass. I don't know when I'm going to retire. And that's the absurdity of the situation. You know, why can't we means test these things?
If you means test the NHS, you don't have an NHS.
Well, it's not the NHS. It's the winter fuel. It's the winter fuel. But Shelley, it's the winter fuel payment. It's a winter fuel payment.
The United States has a means test. I lived there for 10 years.
It's the winter fuel payment.
It's got a disastrous health
The winter fuel payment.
Winter fuel payment has nothing to do with the NHS.
The winter fuel payment you're talking about, she said, would raise £1.4 billion. Is that right?
It's the winter fuel payments I'm talking about.
The winter fuel payments would raise, but it's not like the NHS. It's not a universal service and has to be universal service to make sure everybody has equal treatment.
But with the winter fuel, that's not clear to me. I don't quite understand what you're saying, I'm afraid, because what has that got to do with the NHS?
But, Dee, if you look, I mean, there are, of course, there are choices to be made in how you spend money and what you cut, and I think you're right. I think some of the things that the Taxpayers Alliance proposes, like abolishing child benefit, I'm not sure many people would agree with that.
But that's also means-tested. I think, Shuka, you're doing us a
So you don't want to abolish child benefit?
Just means-testing it, yes. So we also said increase the tax...
It is means-tested.
But increase the tax credit section of it, which means that people who need it...
It's already means-tested.
But it's the whole confused thing where you get, if you earn, just after 50,000, then if you have a two-parent situation, then you still get some money in child benefit, but you don't if it's a one-parent family earning a certain amount. So there's a lot of confusion there.
Back to
That's what we're trying to get
there.
out of it.
All
And
right.
so just raise the child element in tax credit, and then it's properly means-tested.
OK, you, sir.
You alluded to the fact that unemployment has come down, and the Chancellor was pretty delighted to be able to say that. But if you actually look at the tax take, in terms of income tax and national insurance contributions, you'll see that basically the same amount of work is being done, but it's spread over more people. And that's 0 hours contract, low-paid jobs, part-time work. The actual full unemployment crisis has not been fixed, and that's why there's a cost of living crisis. That's why living standards haven't been raising back to the levels we would have expected. It's because it's all 0 hours and low-paid jobs.
Saudi Jabi.
Well, I'm sorry, sir. I have to point out the facts. Let's look. The jobs created, 2 million jobs created over the last 5 years. 80% of those jobs are full-time jobs. That proportion, 80% full-time, 20% part-time, hasn't changed in the last 10 years. The proportion is roughly what it's always been. 0 hours contracts, they represent 2% of the entire workforce. 2%. And most of those people would say they actually want the flexibility of those types of jobs. We don't have an economy that is, the majority of 0 hours contracts or part-time contracts. That's just not true. Out of the jobs actually created, 80% are high-skilled occupation jobs that pay a good salary. That's the facts.
Well, I don't imagine you'd get up to work for minimum wage, would you? I mean, That's
the only job I could get. Of course I would.
Would you?
Of course I would. I have worked for the minimum wage, actually.
Well, you've also worked for $3 million a year, according to your Wikipedia entry.
I've worked one day.
No, I just think it ill behooves people who are massively wealthy.
Don't believe everything you read in Wikipedia.
Well, no, don't believe everything.
I've read a lot about you on Wikipedia too. I'm sure it's not all true.
Well, I'm sure you should get out more, Sajid, instead of reading my Wikipedia entry. But,
you read mine. You should get out more.
No, but I think not forgetting the other red nose that the Tories have, which is, of course, they failed to me. They're the party of controlling immigration, have failed to do that. And as far as I'm aware, the Office of Budget Responsibility think that the increased tax take largely comes from migrants taking up jobs
the woman in the centre
paying
there.
their taxes.
A quick point, and then I want to move on. We've got more to talk about. Yes.
Just on the point of cutting taxes, we've already been told that we're going to have £12 billion worth of welfare cuts. If we cut taxes, how much more are we going to need to cut from the welfare budget?
Well, the proposal is...
All right, Shirley Williams.
But that's exactly what we'd like to know, actually. Sorry.
The proposal is that the welfare budget should be cut by £12 billion. My party thinks that's far too much, because we think that we're now hitting people who really, both disabled people and people who've got mental problems and so forth. Really, it is savage to move further at this present stage. Our view is that we should use the so-called mansion tax, the tax on highly valued houses, in a much richer and more levelled-out way. For example, you pay exactly the same rates on a house that costs £700,000 as one that costs £7 million, and that's simply daft, because we've got lots and lots of very high-value property, and we believe that should be used to offset cuts in welfare of that scale. We think the maximum scale should be about £4 billion. Hang on, and the rest should be raised by forms of taxation which cannot be evaded, and one of the most difficult to evade is a tax on very expensive property.
All right.
Just as an example on that, in our spending plan. We've just worked out that just abolishing the pensions triple lock, just abolishing that and linking it to simple inflation would save 6.8 billion. So that's the sort of stuff we're talking about. Let's have a debate. And none of these politicians could agree with me. That's absolutely fine.
I think we disagree with you.
No, but we don't. But we don't know what you're suggesting. That's fine.
What would you do instead?
Well,
on the pension, we're very clear on it.
Let Sajid answer. Sure. Have you looked at these proposals from the Taxpayers' Allowance? Do you agree with the figures that she says will be saved?
I haven't looked at them, so I can't agree with them.
Shouldn't you have looked at them? If
no,
you're trying
really.
to cut
no, I think the plans that we have are the right plans. I don't need to look at someone else's plans to.
But if somebody comes and says you can save, if somebody comes and says you can save 1.4 billion.
You've got to really. Yours is longer than mine. I'll tell you that.
If somebody comes to you,
I'm talking about your Wikipedia. I'm talking about your Wikipedia entries.
Please.
That point didn't come out right.
Don't make it worse. If somebody comes to you and says we can save 1.4 billion by our calculations on winter fuel allowances for pensioners who could perfectly well afford £200, surely you look at it and say, is that true or not?
But we get all sorts of representations, and of course the government would look at all of those. At the end of the day, you've got to be decisive. That does mean sometimes you've got to make difficult decisions, and we set out our plans, and that was done just yesterday.
And you set out your plans, and I wouldn't be doing my duty if I didn't end by putting to you the point that's been made over and again today, which is this 12 billion on welfare. Do you have any idea how you're going to save it, or have you no idea, or are you holding the information back until after the election?
No, look, we're not holding anything back. During this Parliament, we've had £21 billion of savings from the welfare budget already. During the next Parliament, finding another 12 billion means you're keeping on at the same pace, and we think it can be done. The Chancellor already said, for example, this morning he was asked about it, and he said we would look at taking perhaps the working age benefits and having a cap of 1% increase only on them like we've had in this Parliament. We'd look at things like that. But we will find ways to find that saving, including 13 billion from departments and also 5 billion from measures against aggressive tax avoidance and tax evasion. So that can be done. That is the way to balance the books. But let's remember, it's because we're tackling the deficit, partly that we're enjoying the strength in the economy. If we stop and we don't tackle the deficit anymore, then we will give up the strength that we've got. And why would we do that?
All right. I think we should move on now from this, because I'm sure it'll come up again, the economy, as we get closer to the election. But I should just say about Question Time, we're going to be in Bolton next week and Grays in Essex the week after that. There are the details on the screen. It'd be great if you could come. Let's move on to a question from Sarah Amadi Durfus, please.
After the recent deadly attacks in Tunisia, how can Britain justify its policy of allowing female Daesh terrorist sympathisers back to the UK with open arms?
I think, and this refers to the 3 girls who went to Syria. Yes, among others. Chukwamuna.
Well, I think the reason that we oppose, for so many other reasons, what IS is doing around the world is because they have a complete disrespect for the rule of law, never mind the barbaric things they're doing to other people. If people have gone to the Middle East and have sought to work with IS, when they come back, we should subject them to the rule of law. That's what we're fighting for, after all. And people, if charges need to be brought, charges should be brought and they should be tried in our courts. That's the proper way to do it. So I don't think that we should disregard the rule of law when it comes to people returning from that region, because otherwise it makes a mockery of why we resist what IS does with every fibre in our bodies.
The Met was wrong to tell the families of the 3 girls that they would not be arrested for terrorist offences if they came back to the UK. Well, that was a wrong decision.
Well, I'm not sure they could actually say that. I mean, I used to be a lawyer, but this wasn't my field. But I'm not sure they could say for certain without having known what the girls had been up to while they were there. But if people come back from having done terrible things abroad, let's put them through our justice system. That's what we're fighting for, after all, I think.
Can I add one thing to what
Yes.
Stu's just said, because I think I agree with him completely. But I think there's another thing which we really ought to think about quite deeply. The one country in the Arab Spring which came out with a democracy and with a commitment to human rights and to the rule of law was Tunisia.
It was, yes.
Ask yourself the question, why did IS, above all, pick up on this one country that was the example of what the Arab world had been trying to get for years as the one that should be the main target? And ask yourself what they believe in.
Will Self.
Well, I think, you know, there's been a considerable cross-border traffic between Tunisia and Libya. And as far as I perceive things, the reason Libya is a failed state is because of Western intervention. The West seems to me increasingly deranged in its attitude towards Islamism. It just becomes, for a start, people find it hard to accept that Islamism as a phenomenon is a syncretic phenomenon. It doesn't come out of Islam alone. It comes out of a kind of hybridization between ideas in Islam and Western ideas about political violence. And we carry on with this kind of hysterical attitude over these things because we still seem to believe, as Tony Blair and George Bush believed in 2003, that we can force people to become like us, if necessary, through the barrel of a gun.
What's the hysteria?
Well, the hysteria is, I mean, I may be wrongly accusing the questioner in this case, but I think the hysteria comes in this idea that, you know, if people return to this country and they're citizens, I'm with Choker on this. If you can get a convincing case together and the legislation is in place to prosecute people for committing atrocities abroad, then so be it. Then they should face the rule of law. But we don't require this kind of hysteria around the subject.
Sarah.
It's not necessary.
Half of my family are Muslim. They're all from Iran, and it's not hysteria about Islam. They're two separate things. These people are terrorist murderers. They're not Muslims. And it's not a hysteria. I live in the Middle East, and where I live, if you were a terrorist, you'd get deported or killed.
Well,
and I'm not saying that's the right thing, but I refuse to believe that it's this Western hysteria that turns people into mass murderers, rapists and psychopaths. Because the West didn't do that, the psychos themselves.
No, I mean, people...
So I don't accept that.
People are murderers and psychopaths because everybody has the capacity to be a murderer and a psychopath, I can assure you. That doesn't go... And, you know, one of the last things that happened to me on the way here today, well, two things. One, I teach at a university, and I asked my class who they felt, in terms of ethnic minorities, was most oppressed in Britain at the moment. And they said unanimously, and this is people from many different heritages, that it was British Muslim people. And then on my way here this evening, a British Muslim man stopped me, recognised me, and I got chatting to him. He's a doctor in Manchester. He said that he and his wife, they've just started a website to kind of show the other side of Islam because they feel that everybody is being kind of tarred with this brush at the moment. And he said that he had seriously thought about leaving this country because of the level of stress he's facing. That's what I mean by hysteria.
The woman up there at the back.
I just think if these people are leaving our country to go and join the likes of ISIS, then perhaps when they try to come back, they lose their British citizenship because they're obviously leaving because they don't believe in our culture anymore.
Sandra Javid.
Rather than dealing with them through the law courts, can we not, in the very extreme circumstances, just say that they are no longer British citizens?
Hold on,
OK.
So, ISIS is a vile organisation, not just for all the obvious reasons of the mass terrorism, the killings, the rape, but also just recently, in the last few weeks, in the massive cultural destruction that's also taking place in the Middle East, which something just, you know, if you just think about what kind of people would carry out activity like that. So anyone who goes out to support them, to even if they're not actually fighting themselves, but to help them in any other way so they can carry on with their vile activities, absolutely, if they come back to the UK, they should definitely be questioned. I can't think of any reason why anyone could just come back in. They should be questioned. And if there's any evidence whatsoever that they've broken our laws, remember, we've extended the terrorism laws to overseas, so there can be extraterritorial activities that you can be prosecuted for here, which is absolutely the right thing, then they should be prosecuted under the law. And we should also learn more lessons about why these girls went out in the first place and how can we prevent it from happening again.
Completely agree.
Dear Chakravarti.
Well, you know, I when I think about these things, you know, when I'm thinking with my heart, I absolutely agree with you. I just think, you know, just why, you know, if you're here and you've got the independence that this country's, you know, provided you with, and like a lot of you, I wasn't born here. It was my decision to move to this country, and I love this country. You know, I love everything that it lets me be. I love the fact that it lets me keep my Bengali identity. I sing all that sort of stuff, but it allows me to be a part of the mainstream as well. I mean, look at this beautiful panel. I'm delighted to be sitting here and really taking these, you know, all these people from the establishment, you know, to task, and they have to respect me and listen to me. I love that. But I love it because of certain principles that we do have this country, and I'm glad that Chuck has said this. It means that we do need to give them a fair trial, Sarah, we really do, because that's how we do things in this country, right? So yes, they've gone out, and my heart tells me just leave them out there. It was their decision, they've moved out. But I think we have a responsibility to our culture that we've claimed in this country to give them a fair trial. Once that happens, if we find them guilty, absolutely throw the book at them. But there's no other way out at all. But just one other thing, can I quickly add about why these girls go out? I think we're all a little bit seduced by ISIS. You know, I was listening to the radio, you know, the Today programme the other day, and it's a hugely respectable programme. I love listening to it every morning.
You're very established.
There was really... I have to listen to you guys to know what you're saying, just to keep you in check. Would you believe it? There was one little segment where they were talking about how Jihadi John behaved in his terrorism camp. And they were actually interviewing fellow terrorists, oh my God, fellow terrorists in the terrorism camp, saying, oh, what was he like? You know, what is that? You know, it really is giving these people sort of celebrity status, making them some sort of exciting cult. Why are we doing this? We need to have a debate, but let's not give them the celebrity status, which is clearly seducing all sorts of people.
Can I just say something? I mean, I'd absolutely agree with that, and I think people should, as I said, be subject to the rule of law. But I think it is not to excuse to try and understand why it is seductive for some of our young people. And I think one of the problems, it was very interesting listening to you talk about your identity and being very comfortable with all your different identities. Yeah. And I think for a lot of second and third generation young people who were born here but have different identities, I'm of mixed heritage myself, sometimes managing that and coming to terms with that is quite difficult. And that is why often I feel that sometimes people are quite vulnerable to being sucked into those who perhaps offer a way of defining yourself. And often, when you have multiple identities, often people trying to force you to choose between them. And actually, I think one of the great things about this country is that, you know, you can be happy with all your identities and people will respect all of them. Yeah, but not everybody feels that.
Last point from you, ma'am.
There's been a lot of negative imagery and stories regarding ISIS in the news, and I think maybe because of a misunderstanding with it, maybe if we talked more about it and taught the difference between this group and the religion, that maybe if we, through education, did that, then it would deter young girls or boys going out to these countries in the first place.
That would help.
All right. We're going to a question from Nadine Griffiths, please. Nadine Griffiths.
When many cannot afford to save to buy a house, when will the government address the issue of controlling rent prices?
When people can't afford to... Sorry, you were saying when people can't afford to buy a house, when will the government address the issue of controlling rent prices in order people can save money to buy a house? Is that the idea behind that?
Yeah.
It is. Dear.
The way I would look at this problem, the housing situation is a problem, but I would look at it as a supply-side problem, in that there just isn't enough houses available at the moment, and that is because of very, very stringent housing regulations that we've had in this country for generations now. And what we really need to do is to open that market up so that we have more houses, and that more houses.
It's just land, you mean? Just land. That's the only problem.
We do have that land, but we don't have. It's just so protected. So the whole green belt issue that we have, where we're just not allowed to built on so much of the land. And this is
But that's
very
the point of the green belt, that you don't build on it. That's why it's called the green belt.
But you know, you say green belt and you have ideas of this lush English countryside. Well, let me tell you, a lot of this green belt isn't really lush countryside at all. It is just not built, you know, unbuilt land. And a very interesting report from the Adam Smith Institute showed that if you built on 1% of the green belt in this country, you could build 1 million homes. 1 million homes, that is. You know, so that's how we need to approach this.
Shirley Williams?
Well, I agree with Dia about the lack of housing being a really serious problem. I don't think the answer to that is just to open the whole place up, have no planning, let everything simply
not
together.
The whole place, not the whole thing up at all, Shirley, but just a little bit.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
Let Shirley have her say.
Sorry. Okay, well,
sorry.
Let me just conclude. I think the second problem is that we have a great deal of already blasted land. In other words, land with houses on it that are unpleasant to live in, low standard, inadequate, and all the rest of it. I passionately believe that we ought to make a great major point about developing brown land, which we don't. I think that one of the things we ought to look at again is the possibility of using prefabricated housing for 10 years until we've built up. I mean, frankly, all governments in this country have done a lousy job on housing. Labour at the last election was got one of the lowest housing records of any government.
Only lower than by the coalitions.
No, it's not true.
It's not true.
It is true.
It's not true.
No, it's not
I can tell you.
Oh, God. Well, I don't want to comment
It's too...
already. All the figures.
Yeah, Shirley's absolutely right.
Anyway, let's walk away from that and let's go back to what I was saying, which is that I think we are in such dire straits that we need to think about prefabricated building on brown sites for the time being as a building of a raft towards when we can actually do the proper building. I also think we've got to put a much heavier emphasis on social housing, and if that means saying to developers that a proportion of everything they develop has got to be put into social housing, so be it, because I think the situation is now beyond easy repair.
OK. You're there in the middle.
Going back to your plan about building on greenbelt land, my concern would be, you say now, if you built on 1% of the greenbelt land, once that's happened, if in a few years you said we could do another 1% and then another 1%, and before you've known it, we're up to 50% of our greenbelt land being built on.
I think
where do you start?
That's a good question, but I think as a country, only about 9% of England is built on, I think, is the statistic. So, you know, we've got a long way to go. I understand the point. We've got a long way to go. But can I just bring one other point, which is to do with tax?
Wait, hold it a moment. Keep it in reserve, because now I want to hear more members of the audience about this housing point. The woman there in the back row.
The question wasn't really about building new housing, the question was about a rent cap.
Exactly.
Why are we not getting a rent cap, especially in London, where people are paying £1,200, £1,300 a month for a single bedsit that's completely inadequate, managed terribly by private landlords who are earning out of the taxpayer's pocket? What is the answer to that question?
Sergio Jones.
Well, I think a rent cap would actually make a difficult situation even worse, because what it will mean is that the incentive for landlords to actually buy property, to make it available for rent and stuff, would absolutely fall, and you will find there's even less supply. There's even less supply for people. Rent controls will be absolutely the wrong way to go. The issue is really about making sure that there's greater supply in the market. So, for example, over the last 5 years, we've had a very dramatic reform of planning regulations where they've been cut from 2,000 pages to 50 pages to simplify it, to make it that whole process easier. But it's also about helping people that don't have access to very large deposits. They don't have rich parents. I mean, most people, they've struggled to save the deposits that are required for homes. That's why we've had the Help to Buy scheme. It's helped 80,000 people buy their homes already. Yesterday, you saw a further extension of that, the new Help to Buy ISA scheme, which means for every £200 that someone saves to buy their first home, they will get a £50 bonus from the government. So by helping with affordability and also trying to increase supply by planning rules, that's the way to help. And I'm afraid rent controls, they might sound like the answer. It's been tried before. It's been tried in so many countries, and every single time it has failed.
All right, I go to the questioner. What do you make of the answers so far?
Yeah, so I've heard what you're saying. I think the issue is very much supply side and there's not a lot of housing. But I think we need to address the situation that's going on in the moment. And these low-income families just don't have the money to save. They're paying paycheck by paycheck, food, shelter, energy bills, and that's what they're paying for each month. And we're not actually thinking about what are they going to be doing when their rent is just increasing and increasing, and nobody's actually there to stop these, I don't want to say power hungry or money hungry, these people that are owning these houses, and they can do whatever they want and just charge because it's London, and they know they have a job there, they have their family there, they have children that go to school. They can't leave, so they're forced to pay these prices that are just ridiculous.
Will Self?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be difficult to get any kind of caps on rent for property while any government that's elected is likely to have loads of members who are making a healthy income out of renting accommodation themselves. You know, this all goes back to Thatcher flogging off the council housing stock. And why was it so important? Partly because of unintended consequences. What it did was to create this rentier culture, this culture of buy-to-let, and that's one of the things that has pump-primed the housing market. People talk about supply side. Well, you can't actually prove it, but I'm absolutely certain that land banking is going on, and that the big developers and house builders hold land back until they're sure the market has risen enough to make the kind of profit they want. The government could do something about that.
The Labour government could have too.
And you know what? If you have a commitment towards reinvigorating genuine social housing in this society, which is what enabled everybody in this country to have a roof over their heads and a flushing toilet next door, then you better vote for it in the ballot box, because at the moment our culture is, and our society and our economy is dedicated to the property owner. That's who it's for. And ever since people, and to be fair to property owners, you've sat there over the last 20 or 25 years and watched your wages stagnate while at least your house has gained in value. So, you know, you've got to get out of that one.
Why do you think that Tony Blair didn't bring back the decision that council houses would remain in the public level, which he didn't?
Well,
years of government?
he was more right-wing than Thatcher.
Oh, that's
No, he absolutely was.
Yeah, you say. Go on.
Can I just say, as a landlord, you know, it's...
Go away.
Yeah, I'll probably be going with you. But the point is, I appreciate what, you know, it's nice to paint all landlords with the same brush, that they're all, you know, charging high rents, maybe getting it from the council or wherever, and that all the properties are not in a good state. I think that's not a fair statement. If I can go up to what Dia said, one of the reasons we choose to live in this country is because if you work hard, you invest your money, choose where you wish to invest it, and if you wish to rent it out to create a better life for yourself and your family, I don't see what's wrong with that. You know, not everybody has to be a landlord, but I think to sit here and listen to people saying, you know, that all landlords are the same and all they're trying to do is squeeze out every pound out of the room that they're letting out, I think that is not a fair statement to make.
Do you think there's an argument for some sort of control over rents?
I think if it was universal across the UK and it was done sensibly, but I think it would be very difficult to apply simply because we're a free market state. That's one of the reasons we live in the United Kingdom. If you want to apply rates like that, I would like to hear Will's point. I mean, how would you suggest we go around doing that?
No, I'm not thinking of capping rents in the private sector. What I would like to see is a restart to the council housing programme. You know, what's happened is, if you were in a council tenancy in the last 5 or 10 years, the council will have come to you and said, and you've got a leaky toilet, you've got damp, and they've said, no, we want to hive you off to a housing association. They'll run the properties and we'll give you a big, you know, golden handshake in terms of renovating the properties. So lots of council housing has now been handed over to housing associations, but the housing associations are demutualising. They're becoming businesses. This is still the erosion of any conception of publicly owned housing in terms of the market.
Just a couple of points. On the facts, we have the lowest rate of new build now since the 1920s. House building was higher in every single year of the last Parliament than in this Parliament. And to go to the question, which was what can be done, things can be done. I agree with the gentleman. Not all landlords want to rip off and exploit their tenants. The problem is there are far too many who do, and I see it in my own constituency. And my message, I suppose, to Sajid is, I mean, I think people who seek to run a business off owning property can do that without ripping off and exploiting people. And that's why there are three things that we will do. We will make 3-year tenancies the norm. That's the first thing. Secondly, we're going to stop the lettings agents charging you extortionate fees every single time you're moving property. And thirdly, after an initial rent has been set, we will restrict the rate of increase. There are things government can do. It's a question whether you sit on your hands or you act, and we're going to act.
Well, and when you say... Just to clarify, when you say you'll make 3-year tenancies the norm, what does that mean? So you won't be allowed to have tenancies unless you offer 3 years?
No, you'll give people the right to a 3-year tenancy after the first 6 months.
Right. And the woman there?
In our town, we haven't had any affordable housing built for 30-odd years. We have 6,500 beds in sheds. We had nearly 7,000 people chucked off the housing register because it became an embarrassment. We had people who worked within the housing department who were actually taking the council houses and flats and renting them through agencies.
The man up there on the right. Yes, sir.
I've got a London-specific point. Why can't more powers be devolved to the mayor to deal with organisations like NHS and TfL in London who are sitting on a lot of land, and he should then be held accountable for the number of affordable housing that's actually built in the capital?
What did you say?
That's exactly what was announced yesterday in the budget. The mayor is going to get unprecedented powers over planning in London to free up more land.
The problem is, though, this mayor has a terrible record. He should be building 50,000 to 60,000 houses a year. He's building 20,000 here in London.
May I just to talk about record, Chuka just laid out these things that a future Labour government do. You had 13 years in office to do these things.
And we
you did nothing.
Yes,
I'll tell you what you did.
We did.
The number social housing units declined by 420,000 under Labour. That's what you did.
We bought social housing, 1.2 million social homes, up to a decent home standard. And as I said,
the total number declined by 420,000
every single year of the last Parliament.
We're never going to agree on the figures. Can I just say one more thing to the gentleman who asked the question, which I thought was very, very interesting? I think you're absolutely right. The Greater London authority alone, has a great deal of land which is sexually sterilised because they have not made it available. You talked about London, you can talk about the entire country, because in the entire country there is one area after the other of land which is available in public hands, and it's not let out for social housing, and it ought to be, because that was the point I was trying to make about prefabs. We've got to take really serious action as quickly as possible, and that means getting the public land built with public houses.
OK. Let's... We've only got a few minutes left. We've got an election coming up. There's a question from Peter Stringer that I'm sure all the panel will be very keen to answer. Peter Stringer.
Why can't MPs be more truthful?
Very simple. Be more truthful. Just repeat the question. Why can't MPs be more truthful or more truthful? Will Self.
Well, I mean, are you referring to Messrs Rifkind and Straw and their porkies, or who are you referring to particularly?
All of them.
All of them.
Oh, come on.
Well, they get very upset. You mustn't behave like that towards them because they're sensitive souls and they get very upset. They do. I mean, I talk to MPs and they feel terribly misunderstood and they feel that people don't like the political class anymore and all of this sort of stuff. But if you want to know the reason, it's not exactly why they lie, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on anybody on the panel or say that they're a liar. But I think the revealing thing is what Chuka said to me just as we were walking in this evening. He said, you don't seem at all nervous. And I said, well, I don't really have anything to lose. And he said... he said, yeah, and you can say what you like. So, you know, these guys here, these two have been like kind of Bill and Ben knocking at each other's heads across David. You know, they're worried about what they're going to lose. They're worried about this and that. They're very uptight. They have to toe the party line. They're in thrall to whips. And I feel sorry for them. We should feel sorry for them. But the fact of the matter is, the problem with our political class at the moment, guys, is they won't tell the truth about how little control and power they really have. That's the real big lie. If I were to sit here and hear a politician, when we get to the economy, say, you know what, the world economy is mad. I'm not sure we can do anything to control it. I'd vote for him.
Shirley Williams.
Right. I've been in politics a very, very long time, and I'm going to tell you a short story.
Well, Shirley, we only have a few minutes left.
I want to hear it. The short story is very short.
Yeah. A bedtime story.
We had a leading Labour Party figure who ran to be Prime Minister and to get a Labour government elected. He was called John Smith. He insisted the entire details about what he proposed in terms of taxation should be laid before the public. He was expected to win the election. He lost it heavily. And afterwards, a great many of the political columnists concluded that he'd made the huge mistake of telling the public what the tax increases he was suggesting were going to be. We've got to take common responsibility, not just chuck it to and fro like a ping-pong game, in which you're all innocent and we're all guilty. We're guilty together because we kid ourselves that life can be other than it is, and we better grow up.
I'll leave Bill and Ben till the end. Dear Chakravarti.
I don't know whether I'm just not as cynical as Will is. Probably I will be at some point in life, but I'm not. And yes, we hear a lot of terrible stories about politicians, you know, fiddling this, doing that, and massive disappointment. But we also have good politicians, you know. I've met some. You've all met some. You all know people who come into politics because they believe in something. You may not agree with them, but they believe in something and they stand by it. So I think sometimes we, like this gentleman here was just saying, you know, we tar everybody with the same brush, and perhaps we shouldn't be doing that so much. But I do think that our politicians could be a little bit braver and perhaps a little bit more honest about a lot of things. Because I do think, going back to my spending plan, I rather think that whoever comes to power in May will be implementing some of these plans that I've got right here, but they're not going to tell you about it. You're going to find out once it's been implemented.
All right. Very briefly, Chuka Umunna and then Sajid Javid.
I think sometimes, yes, politicians, we are our own worst enemies, but I have to say, I've been in the House of Commons since 2010, and on the whole, the people that I've dealt with on all sides of the House, all different parties, I found to be generally honest people, and that's probably not a popular thing for me to say. But let me say the second thing, is very often people seek to put us on the spot on issues which are not black and white and are sometimes a bit grey. And if you give a grey answer, you feel like you're maybe not giving people what they want because you're not just saying it's black or white. And sometimes a lot is grey. And the last thing I'd say is this, which is that, sir, if you're not happy with the way politics is, please do get involved, because part of the problem politics has, it doesn't look like modern Britain at the moment. And if people don't like it, it's easy to criticise the system, but please do get involved. We need many more people to get involved in politics if we're to really change it and shake it up, and I believe we need to do that.
I agree with everything Chuka just said.
Oh, closing ranks.
Are you being truthful, though? Are you being truthful?
Bill and Ben are in agreement. Now, but what I would just add is this. After 5 years in Parliament, I think MPs, and former MPs for that matter, that I had the privilege of meeting, like Shirley and others, they're in Parliament because they actually want to make the country better. They want to help people. And that's why they decided to come into Parliament. Yes, there will always be a few rogue operators that may be there, but the vast number of MPs want to help you. It doesn't matter if they're Labour or Conservative or Liberal Democrat. It doesn't matter. They all want to help. We might disagree, as you've seen tonight, on how to do it. But we want to help people. And that's why we're in Parliament. And we should be proud of that, especially when you look at other countries around the world. Look across at Europe. Look at Asia, look at Africa, look at the governments other countries have, and I think then reflect on your own, and then perhaps you'll be a bit more proud about it.
Well,
That's it, Will. Sorry. Time's up. Next week. All right, you can expostulate, but it's too late.
You did all right.
Next week we're going to be in Bolton with Question Time. We have the Education Secretary, Nicky Morgan, for the Tories. We have Labour's leader in Scotland, Jim Murphy on the panel, and Janet Street-Porter, the broadcaster and journalist. And the week after that, we're going to be at Grays in Essex. So it's Bolton next week, Grays in Essex the week after. There's the address to go to, or you can call us 0330 123 9988 as the debates hot up before the election comes. Do come and join us. If you're on 5 Live at the moment, of course, you know the debate continues on Question Time, Extra Time. But my thanks to our panel here, to all of you who came to Croydon. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
Carolina Hearn helps give this week's news a right royal going over. Next here on BBC One.